Welcome back to the podcast. And in this episode, we are going to solve your consistency problem on the weekends. Why you keep getting back on track on Monday, going super strong Monday through Friday, but then Friday night comes around, Saturday, Sunday, and you all of a sudden just say, screw it, I am going to give up and start over again on Monday. We're going to break that cycle with a couple of specific skills and frameworks that you can use on the weekends to stay better on track and feel amazing about your choices, even if you are on the go or eating out and not having your normal stuff. The issue is that weekends, right? That's the big issue that we see over and over and over again, is that Monday through Friday is great, but Friday night, Saturday, Sunday goes to shit. And we're like, what the heck, right? And we're like, why can't I stick to it? Why don't I have enough willpower, discipline? And we blame ourselves. That's the worst part that I actually hate the most, is that we blame ourselves. We get down on ourselves and we think that, damn, I just don't want it bad enough. I'm just not capable. And that's not true. You just don't have the right frameworks. And so in this video, here, I'm going to be teaching you exactly how to use these mindful eating frameworks to fix your weekend overeating problem. I truly believe that you can do that with these frameworks. And so we want to make sure that we solve the problem of knowing how to moderate ourselves on the weekends when we're out to eat, because it's not going to be all or nothing. It's not going to be, either I can stick to perfectly prepped meals that I cooked, or I'm not going to eat healthy at all, right? We have to find a middle ground. The problem is that we're so hung up on being perfect. We're so hung up on making sure that we stick to it perfectly 7 days a week that as soon as we make one tiny mistake, we go into that F it, screw it mode, and it ruins everything, leaving us worse off than if we had just accepted some imperfections in the first place. And so that's the key here, recognizing that A, we'll never be perfect, so we might as well learn how to accept imperfection, but B, learning how to do that strategically in a way that actually moves us forward with our progress, rather than ruining it every single weekend and having to start over and just running in circles perpetually, right? So here's how we do that. Essentially, step one is to understand these mindful eating frameworks, and when to use them is whenever you're out to eat, whenever you're in a situation where you might otherwise throw in the towel and say, screw it, let's try these first. So I'm going to explain them one by one and give you the full lowdown. So number one is going to be our 4 quarters rule. So our 4 quarters rule is basically, when you get a plate, guess what? Restaurant's portion way too much. Cut that into 4s, separate it on your plate, and go 1 quarter at a time with a pause in between each one, and ask yourself, hey, am I satisfied yet? Let me wait a minute and see. Maybe just look up, engage in the conversation for a minute, and then make a decision, a conscious decision of whether or not you want to go back in for the 2nd quarter, the 3rd quarter, the 4th quarter. It is okay to eat everything that you're given, but the key here is that you don't have to, and you should align what you choose with what you're feeling in terms of fullness in your body, right? So that's number one, the 4 quarters rule. One of my favorites is called favorites first. So what this does is essentially turns like save the best for last on its head. So that's what we typically do, right? We typically save the best for last whenever we go out to eat. We save the best bite for last. But ultimately what that does is it leaves us prone to overeating, because when we save the best for last, we might be full by the time we get to the last. And then we're like, well, that's my favorite part, so I'm going to eat it. And then we overeat, and then we're upset with ourselves. So favorites first is essentially just eating the thing you love the most first instead of last. Enjoy it. And yes, this might mess up the fact that you might not get enough protein or vegetables in at that meal. But again, think about what is the net positive of the situation. Staying within your total calories, or being able to staying within your total calories, or getting your protein. And usually if your goal is fat loss, then you're going to want to just stay within your total calories first and still try to hit your protein. But if both can't happen and it's a rare occurrence, it's okay. So Favorites first. That is a really, really good one. And then usually you can tell when you're satisfied and leave some of that food on your plate for later, bring it home as leftovers, or just leave it because you're truly satisfied. Another one, number 3, is our 80% full rule. So this is a little bit trickier to get the hang of, but essentially really trying to stop eating and slow down when we're about 50, 60% satisfied, waiting a little bit, seeing how we feel, just taking it slow enough to where we can actually feel when we're comfortably full and satisfied, but not overstuffed. And that is a thin line to walk on. And it takes a lot of practice, and you're never going to get it right perfectly all the time. You're going to fluctuate, right? But the key here is to slow down and be mindful and really think about it. It will help, and it will lead you away from overeating as often. Another one is, it's called wine tasting your food. But essentially all that means is we're not swirling our food around or smelling it a ton. But what we want to do is we do want to enjoy our food with all of our senses, because what that does, if we fully chew it, if we smell it, if we really pay attention to the texture of it in our mouths, what does that do? It increases not only our physiological satisfaction because we're able to break down the food more and send more of those physical signals through our body and our digestive system back to our brain, but also psychologically. It's more satisfying because you get to basically have more of those like, yum, tasty moments as you're chewing, as you're really tasting the food. And that is going to psychologically satisfy you more than if you were to scarf down the food, not even really taste it. That's where later cravings come in. So definitely a good one to keep in your back pocket. And then the last one that I really like is a little different, but you've heard it before probably if you follow me, but that is dessert every day. I like to preach to eat dessert every day on purpose, even when you don't feel like it, because a lot of times we get into the cycle of overeating on the weekends because we think, well, I'm going to get back on track on Monday and I have to get it all in now before we start over, be perfect, right? That's never going to happen. So what if we just had dessert every single day, Monday through Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and by the time the weekend comes around, we don't even want more because we've been having dessert every single day and we're kind of tired of it at that point. Think about how that would turn the tables and reinforcing that mentality that the food will always be there. It will. So why don't we just try to remember that on a day-by-day basis? So really just practice these. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to have to celebrate small wins rather than big ones with this sort of thing, because you still might overeat a little bit. You might not be perfect. You might blow over your calories a little bit still, but it is going to make the situation better than if you were to say screw it. And that's the really important thing to remember, is that consistency over perfection and progress over perfection, as cheesy as it is. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the PCC podcast. Again, I appreciate your time and attention, as I know that that is the most valuable resource that there is. So if you did like this podcast and gained value from it, make sure to leave a rating and review for the show, as it does help us impact and reach more women. And also subscribe to the podcast if you want more stuff like this. So thank you again for listening, and all of our social media profiles will be in the show notes, and I'll hope to see you back next Monday.